If you're lucky, you've made it through the first weeks of summer without a sunburn. However, many of us get too excited with those first few hot days that any thought of sun protection goes out the window. That is, until an angry bright red burn painfully reminds us. And though we can see a physical change on our skin, Dr. Susan Massick says the real issue to worry about is when those UV rays get absorbed into our skin. At that point, it begins to cause DNA damage in our cells.
In terms of the technical phrasing, it's described as oxidative stress. It increases reactive oxygen species and you get free radical formation. And that's what in turn damages your DNA. And when it happens to damage the DNA in your cells, the cells are no longer able to repair themselves. And over time, the cells become more and more susceptible to changes to the point where the skin cells start to break down. You're going to be increased risk for different things like short-term sunburn, but also long-term increased risk for skin cancer.
Massick is a dermatologist and associate professor of dermatology at The Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center. She's no stranger to the various protection products on the market, but one trend that's caused a lot of conversation recently is the movement for eating your sunscreen. Don't worry, we're not talking about the white paste you slather on before the beach. Edible sunscreen, or SPF gummies, are supplements that claim to protect you from sun damage from the inside out. But is a gummy able to replace your normal SPF?
And what happens with one of the most common ones, which is called polypodium leukotomous extract, or PLE, is the most common one. It is found that at the cell level, it could potentially protect from that DNA damage and decrease as an antioxidant that oxidative stress. So the idea is that potentially it could help in terms of increase what's called the minimal erythema dose. So the amount of sun that you can get before you start to sunburn. So that's helpful. In terms of broad studies, it has been shown to help in that oxidative stress at a cell level. So that's very helpful. But in terms, is it going to be 100% across the board effective? Maybe, maybe not. So it's a supplement, it's an additive, but it's not your only protection.
Massick says in no way are these gummies able to replace traditional sunscreen.
So you still will need your traditional sunscreens to provide you with the best skincare coverage and protection. Actually, the best protection would be not to get any sun at all, but that's not necessarily feasible in the summer. So we want to make sure people are enjoying themselves, but also protecting themselves.
That's not to say there isn't a place for SPF gummies in your routine, but in order for them to be as effective as possible, you need to be taking them every day. Popping one in before going out in the sun won't help mitigate damage. But since many of these supplements are comprised of antioxidants and plant extracts, would it be as effective to skip the gummy and just eat a bunch of berries? Massick says that strategy won't help as much as you'd think.
So antioxidants in general actually have a huge impact in terms of our overall health. But just ingesting antioxidants, for example, in fresh fruit or blueberries, strawberries, those kinds of berries, it may not necessarily provide you with as much protection as we would hope. So you still have to rely on your regular traditional sunscreens.
In fact, the one ingredient that seems to be the most effective for edible sunscreen is only found in plants from Central and South America. So not as easy to get as a pack of blueberries. But even though we can't truly eat our sun protection, the current mineral and chemical sunscreens perform really well, as long as you're actually applying them.
I find both equally effective, but you have to use them and make sure that you're applying generously. A lot of folks just don't put on enough or don't reapply when they should. In terms of mineral sunscreens, the beauty about mineral sunscreens, they're a little bit faster acting, less likely to cause irritation because they're natural minerals. People don't typically experience rashes or sensitivity to those products. In terms of chemical sunscreens, what's nice about them is they tend to rub in a little more easily. They don't look as opaque, for example, as some of the mineral sunscreens can. Some people will complain about that white cast that sometimes appears on the skin with mineral sunscreens. But if you rub in the mineral sunscreens or get the micronized versions, then that issue should not be a main problem.
Chemical sunscreens can also be an irritant, so Massick recommends testing out the product on a small patch of skin before applying it all over. For the most part, she says that since both types of products offer good protection, the choice between the two boils down to personal preference.
But also keep in mind, sunscreens come in different types of vehicles. So some are gels, some are creams, some are lotions, some are powder, aerosols. There are lots of different types of sunscreen in that regard. And again, that's a personal preference. But the key is you have to make sure that you apply and apply all over. You don't want to miss your ears or your lips or your scalp or different places that we tend to forget about. But also when you do apply it, you want to make sure you actually rub it in. So for example, those aerosols, convenient. People like to use them. But if you spray them in the wind, half of it's blowing away. So you want to make sure that you actually spray it into your hand, then rub it into your skin.
Additionally, powder sunscreen can be a really great option for your scalp, but Massick says these need to be applied in multiple layers to truly get the necessary protection.
A lot of that depends on what you like, what's available to you, and what you know you're going to use consistently, because a lot of folks have their sunscreen in their bags and they just don't use them, or they say, oh shoot, I forgot to put it in my beach bag, and they go to the pool and they just don't have it with them. So always have it accessible to you, whether it's on your person, in your car, in your sports bag, or whatever it takes to make sure that you have it available.
While it's never too late to make sun protection part of your daily routine, you'll find much more benefits from starting as early as possible. Though many people assume that once a sunburn fades, your skin is just like new, UV damage is actually cumulative, meaning that it builds up throughout our lifetime.
It starts at an early age when we're children, into our teenage years, into adulthood. So we want to make sure we're as careful as possible. So when folks say, well, I'm using my sunscreen over the last several years, I'm not understanding why I'm seeing some of these skin changes. Well, some of the damage was actually occurring way beforehand. So in terms of cumulative sun and sun exposure, over time, our skin just changes in terms of its ability to withstand sun exposure. So you'll see folks that have the telltale signs of long-term chronic sun exposure. The skin starts to look leathery in appearance, will have some discoloration to it, and then the texture changes as well. So in terms of it's never too late to start, we definitely want to start at any point. But if we could start earlier on, that can be really, really helpful in the long run.
Thankfully, there are steps you can take to minimize the damage if you find yourself out in the sun without any protection.
What a sunburn actually is basically an acute inflammatory reaction related to too much ultraviolet light. So the problem is that inflammatory reaction occurs a couple of hours before you actually see the redness on your skin, or it feels warm to the touch, or it starts to get tender or pink in color. So you actually almost miss the boat at that point. So as soon as you start to notice any of those symptoms, you have to go inside. You have to actually get out from the sun. It's not enough to throw on a shirt or to try to put sunscreen on top of it, or just to get into the shade. You actually have to go inside.
The next goal is to cool down the skin as quickly as possible. You can hop in a cool shower or post up next to an air conditioning fan, but make sure you're not putting something extremely cold like an ice pack directly onto the skin.
If you want to use something like an ice pack, you have to make sure you wrap it so the ice is not directly onto your skin. So you got to stay cool. Hydrate, because you're actually losing heat from your body with a sunburn. You can get dehydrated, so you got to make sure you're taking in fluids. And then typically, if you are experiencing a lot of pain or discomfort, something like NSAIDs, the ibuprofen, naproxen, all the package inserts, that can help with some of that inflammation. So you just have to stay really nice and cool. I think people are so eager to be outside. It's been a long spring, cold spring for a lot of us. And so people are excited to be outside. They just get too much too quickly in terms of sun, and they end up burning. But if they're on vacation, they feel like they have to go out the next day. You can't. You have to stay indoors as long as it takes for the skin to recover from that injury.
You can find more information about Dr. Susan Massick and all of our guests on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. For more behind the scenes, follow Radio Health Journal on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Our writer-producer is Kristen Farah. Our production manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Greg Johnson.